Anika Sharma was just 19 when her dreams brought her to New York, but Darius Kane turned those dreams into a deadly trap she could never escape. Anika Sharma was only 19 when she arrived in New York City, carrying a single suitcase and a world of ambition. Coming from Mumbai, India, she had always been considered bright and disciplined, the kind of student who excelled in academics while quietly pursuing dreams her family could scarcely imagine. Winning a scholarship to study business management at a prestigious New York university felt like a ticket to a future she had worked tirelessly for. Her parents believed she would focus solely on her studies, maintaining her reputation as a hard-working and responsible young woman. They never suspected that New York's glittering streets and endless possibilities would soon pull her into a life far removed from their expectations. At first, Anika's life seemed predictable and carefully structured. She shared a modest apartment with her roommate and close friend, Lena Patel. Their small living space became a hub for late-night study sessions, quiet dinners, and occasional moments of laughter that reminded them both of home. During the day, Anika immersed herself in lectures, projects, and part-time work at a local cafe. She walked through bustling streets, capturing images of libraries, parks, and iconic landmarks to share with friends and family. Her social media reflected the life of a diligent student, focused, responsible, and grounded. But New York had a way of offering temptations disguised as opportunities. Within months, Anika's carefully managed life began to shift. She started attending networking events that promised exposure and mentorship, places where students mingled with professionals and investors. Expensive brunches, rooftop cafes, and boutique stores slowly entered her world. She began posting images that reflected this new lifestyle: designer handbags, cocktails in luxurious settings, and glimpses of private clubs. Her friends noticed the change. Lena occasionally questioned how she afforded such experiences, but Anika brushed off the concern, claiming freelance modeling jobs and part-time consulting work that supposedly covered these expenses. The reality was more complicated. Anika had begun a secret connection with Darius Kane, a 38-year-old real estate investor who operated discreetly in the city. Their relationship began as mentorship, framed as guidance for an ambitious student eager to learn the ropes of investment and business. But it quickly evolved into something far more private and clandestine. Darius's wealth, charm, and influence drew Anika into a world of luxury she had never known, and she allowed herself to be swept along, caught between fascination and the thrill of secrecy. As Anika's life split into two worlds, the pressures of maintaining them became apparent. Her academic responsibilities persisted, but her attention was divided. She navigated her studies with a careful balance, attending lectures and submitting assignments while simultaneously managing her meetings, gifts, and digital communications with Darius. Her social media began to paint a carefully curated image of a student thriving in New York, but the truth behind the scenes was far more complex. Isolation played a key role in her vulnerability. Being far from home meant she relied on digital connections for support, and Darius's attention felt validating and empowering. She did not yet realize how deeply entangled she was becoming. The glamorous lifestyle, the attention from a powerful man, and the allure of financial independence slowly eroded the boundaries she had once set for herself. By the end of her first semester, Anika had become a young woman living a double life. To her family, she was the diligent student they had always known. To Darius, she had become a significant part of a hidden world built on influence, wealth, and secrecy. The stage was set for a story that would move far beyond the streets of New York, a story of ambition, desire, and danger that she could never have anticipated. The first steps into this hidden life would mark the beginning of a journey where trust, secrecy, and manipulation intertwined, and where one wrong step could prove fatal. Darius Kane was a man who lived in the shadows of power and wealth, and yet his influence stretched across the very heart of New York City. Unlike many wealthy figures, he avoided publicity and social media presence. carefully controlling every detail of his personal and professional life. He was known among insiders as a shrewd real estate investor, acquiring properties across boroughs, often through shell companies and offshore accounts. To the public, he was successful but elusive. To those close enough to his inner circle, he was controlling, calculated, and unpredictable. Anika first met Darius through a private networking app designed to connect ambitious students with experienced investors. At first, he presented himself as a mentor, someone who could guide her through the complexities of business and investment. His messages were polite, professional, and encouraging, making it easy for Anika to trust him. Soon, however, the mentorship evolved into a secretive relationship that existed entirely outside the view of friends, family, and the public. The meetings began as discreet lunches at boutique cafes and private business meetings. Gifts were small at first, designer notebooks, books, or occasional coffee shop treats, but escalated quickly. By the time a few months had passed, Anika found herself attending luxury brunches, visiting upscale hotels, and receiving expensive clothing and jewelry. The sudden access to wealth and exclusivity was intoxicating. For a young student far from home, the attention and generosity were difficult to resist. Darius's methods were subtle but precise. He maintained control by dictating the locations of their meetings, the timing of interactions, and the flow of gifts and financial support. Transfers of money arrived in carefully structured amounts, often routed through temporary accounts to avoid detection. Every gift, every payment, every private message was part of a system designed to create dependence. Anika, unaware of the full scope, believed these gestures were simply a reflection of care and admiration. Investigators would later discover that Anika had begun to realize the precariousness of her situation. She had started saving messages and keeping records of financial transfers. It seemed that somewhere inside, she sensed that the relationship was more than a simple romance, that there were rules she did not fully understand, and obligations she could not easily escape. Yet her fascination with Darius, combined with the thrill of secrecy and luxury, kept her engaged. She was entangled in a web she could not yet see fully. As the months progressed, Anika became more involved in Darius's private world. She was introduced to high-level documents, some relating to real estate deals, others to financial strategies. Her involvement appeared innocent at first, merely shadowing and observing, but soon her access expanded. She began organizing files, storing information, and occasionally transmitting data on his behalf. What seemed like mentorship had evolved into participation in complex business operations she barely understood. The secrecy intensified. Darius ensured that Anika's friends knew little about their interactions, and Anika herself began to isolate from social circles that might question her new lifestyle. Her days became consumed with managing appearances and obligations, attending classes while juggling private meetings that could occur anywhere in Manhattan, often in locations with no witnesses or records. The city became both a playground and a trap, offering excitement on one side and invisible dangers on the other. Darius's influence extended beyond financial control. He had a remarkable ability to manipulate trust, making Anika feel valued, admired, and safe, while simultaneously binding her to obligations she could not see clearly. Every action, every gift, every private message was part of a system designed to create dependence. Anika, unaware of the full scope, believed these gestures were simply a reflection of care and admiration. By the end of this period, Anika was no longer merely a student seeking opportunity. She was a participant in a hidden, carefully managed system that revolved around Darius Kane. She had stepped into a world of power, secrecy, and control, one that offered luxury and influence, but carried hidden dangers she was only beginning to recognize. The mentor had become a presence that shaped her choices, her movements, and ultimately, her fate. As Anika Sharma became more deeply involved in Darius Kane's world, her life transformed into a delicate balancing act between school, secrecy, and obligations she barely understood. What had started as mentorship and occasional luxury soon evolved into something far more complex, a web of financial transactions, hidden agendas, and private meetings that required constant attention. Every step she took seemed measured, yet every step drew her closer to a danger she could neither see nor escape. Her financial life grew increasingly complicated. Small deposits began arriving in her accounts under vague descriptions, consulting fee or gift, but the amounts and frequency escalated rapidly. Anika soon found herself moving portions of the money to other accounts or shell entities, following instructions she barely questioned. The transactions were structured to leave minimal traces, often using apps or online platforms that promised anonymity. To Anika, this seemed like an extension of her involvement in Darius's business ventures. In reality, she had become a tool, an intermediary in a network she didn't fully understand. Digital communications dominated her time. Encrypted messages, private email threads, and hidden cloud storage became the center of her daily routine. Investigators later determined that Anika had unwittingly gathered sensitive information for Darius, including financial records, business plans, and personal data belonging to his associates. At first, she merely stored these files, thinking they were part of her role as a trusted companion, but over time, the stakes increased. Copies of these files suggested she began to realize the potential danger of possessing them. Her academic performance began to falter. Assignments were late, lectures missed, and her focus fractured. Lena Patel, her roommate, noticed the change. The dark circles under her eyes, her distracted demeanor, and her growing anxiety, but Anika offered vague explanations about busy schedules and project deadlines. Behind the explanations, she navigated secret meetings in private office spaces, short-term rentals, and even vehicles parked in quiet streets where no one could observe the exchanges. A shocking twist emerged when investigators uncovered forged documents connected to Anika. Certain proposals and contracts, some in her name, had been submitted to investors and business partners. While she may have believed she was acting under Darius's guidance, the evidence suggested she was being manipulated into serving as the face of a larger financial scheme. The documents contained confidential details that could compromise significant investments if exposed, positioning Anika as a potential liability in Darius's eyes. Isolation compounded her vulnerability. Away from family, far from familiar surroundings, and caught between trust and fear, Anika relied increasingly on Darius as her source of direction. The lavish lifestyle, once thrilling, now carried pressure and risk. She began making copies of files, saving messages, and cataloging transactions, subtle signs of a growing awareness that she held dangerous knowledge. Her life had become a high-stakes game where each move had consequences she could not fully predict. The boundaries between her ordinary life and her hidden existence blurred completely. She no longer existed solely as a student, she was an active participant in a system of secrecy and financial manipulation. Every meeting, every transfer, and every decision tied her closer to Darius Kane and to the risks associated with someone who viewed relationships as tools rather than connections. By the end of this period, Anika had reached a critical point. She knew too much, held too many secrets, and existed in a space where trust was fragile and danger was constant. The glamorous world that had once seemed exciting had revealed itself as a trap. The duality of her life, student by day, participant in a hidden network by night, had created a tension that was unsustainable. What had begun as mentorship and admiration had evolved into a web of deception, secrecy, and manipulation. Anika Sharma was no longer just a young student navigating a new city. She had become an essential part of a dangerous system, unaware of how close she was to being expendable. Each choice, each meeting, each hidden file was leading her toward a point of no return, setting the stage for the catastrophic events that would soon unfold. On a chilly November evening, Anika Sharma left her apartment for a meeting that would become the last she ever attended. The sky was dark and the streets of Manhattan buzzed with activity, but her route took her far from the familiar areas she frequented. Her phone's GPS tracked her movements along isolated streets and quiet neighborhoods, places she had never visited for school or social events. Surveillance cameras caught her leaving the building with her backpack, phone, and a sense of purpose, yet nothing in those moments hinted at the danger awaiting her. Her destination was a private location arranged by Darius Kane, one of several remote spots he preferred for meetings that required discretion. The route was unusual, designed to avoid cameras, witnesses, and anyone who might notice their interaction. Once she arrived, there was no public record of what occurred inside the building. The authorities would later describe the location as carefully chosen, secluded enough to ensure control over every variable, yet close enough for quick escape. Hours later, when Anika failed to return, concern began to mount. Lena Patel, her roommate, tried calling her multiple times with no response. Her phone went unanswered and location services showed no activity beyond a certain point. At first, friends and family assumed she had simply stayed late for meetings or errands. It wasn't until nearly 2 days passed that a full-scale search began. Her body was eventually discovered in an abandoned warehouse district on the outskirts of the city. At first glance, it appeared as though she had suffered a fatal fall, but closer examination told a different story. Bruising inconsistent with a simple accident, traces of toxic substances in her system, and the positioning of her body suggested foul play. Tire marks and drag traces near the scene indicated the possibility of staging, as though the scene had been meticulously arranged to appear accidental. Investigators immediately suspected that this was not a random act of violence, but a calculated plan. At the same time, Darius Kane vanished. Within hours of Anika's last digital trace, his residences were empty, his security systems disabled, and his private jet departed the state. Financial accounts tied to him showed sudden withdrawals and closures, erasing evidence of his movements. Digital footprints that had once been consistent were now erased, suggesting careful preparation for disappearance. It became clear that Anika's death and Darius's vanishing were not coincidental, they were coordinated. Investigators discovered that Anika had accessed sensitive files shortly before leaving her apartment, files containing financial records and personal information tied to Darius's operations. Some files appeared to have been opened but not transmitted, while others were remotely deleted in the hours following her death. This suggested someone else, likely Darius or an associate, was actively managing the information she carried, ensuring that it would not compromise the network. What made the night truly chilling was the precision with which every action seemed calculated. Anika's route, the isolation of the meeting, the timing of her disappearance, and Darius's immediate flight all pointed to premeditation. This was not an impulsive crime, it was the removal of a liability. Anika had come to know too much, held too much information, and occupied a position in a network where knowledge could be fatal. The broader implications were clear to investigators. The glamorous world Anika had been drawn into was in reality a carefully constructed system of control, manipulation, and secrecy. Luxury and affection had been tools, not genuine connection, and her life had become expendable the moment she became a risk. The night of her death was not an accident, but a decisive move in a plan that had been in motion for months, a plan that left a young student dead and a powerful man free to disappear. Anika Sharma's death marked the collapse of a life that once seemed full of promise. The streets of Manhattan, the city of endless opportunity, became a backdrop for a meticulously executed crime, one that exposed the dangers of trust, secrecy, and power when wielded without conscience. That night would become the pivotal moment where ambition, love, and manipulation converged into tragedy. In the months following Anika Sharma's death, investigators worked tirelessly to piece together the puzzle she had left behind. Every digital trace, financial record, and encrypted file became a clue to understanding the events leading up to her disappearance and murder. Authorities quickly realized that her involvement with Darius Kane had been far more than a secret romance. It was a carefully orchestrated entanglement in a web of manipulation, financial deception, and control. Forensic analysis revealed that Anika had been at the center of a broader operation. Her devices contained fragments of encrypted documents, financial spreadsheets, and correspondence tied to Darius's network. Although many files had been remotely deleted, some remnants survived, showing a pattern of exploitation and calculated trust. Anika had unknowingly become the intermediary for transactions, proposals, and sensitive information that Darius moved across accounts and borders. She had been positioned as both participant and witness, a dangerous combination in a network built on secrecy. Investigators soon discovered that Darius Kane had used similar methods with other young women, employing charm, wealth, and secrecy to gain access to sensitive information. Anika was the only one whose knowledge and digital footprint posed a tangible risk. Files she had saved, copies she had made, and messages she had retained could have exposed the network, revealing offshore accounts, shell companies, and fraudulent transactions. Her death was no random act, it was a removal of a liability. Despite extensive efforts, Darius Kane remained elusive. Authorities traced some movements through international banking and travel records, but each trail ended in a dead end. Fake passports, shell corporations, and offshore accounts created a digital and physical labyrinth. No matter how much evidence investigators gathered, Darius seemed to exist outside the reach of law enforcement. The systems he had built for anonymity, control, and evasion had worked exactly as intended. Anika's family faced a different reality. They received her personal belongings months later, carefully packaged but stripped of anything digital that could reveal the truth. The official reports described her death as a tragic accident, leaving her parents and friends with little clarity and no justice. Every unanswered question added weight to the grief they carried, highlighting the stark contrast between her life as a vibrant young student and her death as a victim of a meticulously executed plan. The story of Anika Sharma exposed one of the harsh truths of power and manipulation. In a world where wealth and influence dominate, human lives can become expendable. The glamorous life she had been drawn into, with luxury, attention, and opportunity, had masked the danger of exploitation. Her ambition, trust, and curiosity, qualities that should have led to growth, made her a target in a system designed to reward control and punish knowledge. Even years later, traces of Darius Kane's network appeared in unrelated investigations under different names. His methods and patterns were recognizable, but proving a direct link remained impossible. The young student who had once navigated New York with hope and determination became a cautionary tale, a reminder of how charm, wealth, and secrecy can conceal danger. The final truth is stark. Anika Sharma did not die because of a chance encounter or a random misfortune. She died because she knew too much and occupied a position in a system where knowledge could be fatal. Her story is a warning about the thin line between opportunity and danger, trust and manipulation. It reveals the invisible structures of control and the devastating consequences when someone crosses them. In the end, the legacy of Anika Sharma is not just in the tragedy of her death, but in the lessons it leaves behind. It is a story of ambition exploited, secrets weaponized, and a life cut short by a calculated act. Her case reminds the world that behind the glitter of wealth and luxury, there can exist a dark reality where power, manipulation, and secrecy can claim the most unsuspecting victims.